everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this rather unique approach to knowledge sharing. My name is Eric Allum. I'm the president of Skipping Stone North America, and we've put together this panel to have a discussion about the complexities that are impacting the energy space today and their effect on everything from tactical implementation to strategic decision making and everything in between. So I have with me uh, two highly intelligent and accomplished executives from the energy space. I have Kevin Hagen, among other things. Kevin is formerly the Global Sustainability Executive Lead for Iron Mountain Data Centers and was responsible for a lot of Iron Mountain's success in implementing their sustainable practices and achieving sustainability goals that led the industry. Following that, he stepped into a critical role as the interim CEO of CEBA, which is now the Corporate Energy Buyers Association, representing the vast majority of large corporate buyers out of the Fortune 500. I also have Liam Relihan. Liam is the CEO and founder of Full Stack Energy, which is a widely regarded technology and engineering firm across Europe and several other places, including North America. Liam is based in Ireland and is going to have some things to share with us today regarding how he sees the application of technology and new technologies impacting the decision making that we have that we're facing here in the U.S. today. And as I said, I'm Eric Allum. I'm formerly the CEO of RPD Energy, leading that company for about 9 years to a successful sale, several different turnarounds of energy organizations in different spaces in my past, and now leading North America for Skipping Stone, which is a 30-plus-year-old consultancy with offices in the U.S. and Japan. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I think you registered, so you understand that the concept is to build on the analogy of the ancient parable with the blind men and the elephant. So three blind men are exploring different parts of an elephant. They each do a great job of defining the part that they're touching. However, they do an extremely poor job of bringing those observations together to be able to describe the whole animal. We see similar things happening with the emerging complexity of the energy space. We're seeing more and more interdependencies, more things leaking out of one area that have an impact and effect on another area. It's making the entire landscape more complex, and we want to begin to try and sort that out as a part of our discussion today. So with that in mind, let me start with Kevin. Kevin, given what you're seeing today, what do you think are the key challenges that are facing energy leaders across organizations?
I think it's a great setup, Eric. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. We are experiencing more disruption in the energy space, energy and utility space, electricity space in particular, than perhaps we've seen in maybe 50 years. From the expansion of growth as a thing, and in fact, accelerated growth, load growth, all the way to new technologies, behind the meter solutions, batteries. We're seeing a tremendous amount of disruption in the space, from energy contracting to energy solutions. What's interesting about that is that quickly all of these solutions and all of these challenges become more than companies have been used to managing in the past. And whether you're an energy manager or someplace else in the business, finance or operations, all of a sudden energy reliability, energy or electricity reliability, availability, and cost volatility, not to mention carbon content, creates a really complex network of challenges that organizations are trying to get their arms around. It's a pretty complex but fascinating space, because while the risks are much greater than they ever used to be, so are the opportunities.
Thanks. Liam, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I've been where energy meets technology for about 20 years now. And before that, I was just primarily in the technology business. And it's never been, the level of innovation has never been greater. But also the dangers, the complexities have also never been greater either. So like here in Europe, we have got to deal with energy resilience. What happens if is a conflict situation? Um, what happens if the power goes down? Can businesses continue to operate? We have got the 24/7 energy matching now, bringing an unprecedented need for numbers and for cross correlation between different data sets. We're seeing variable rate tariffs. Um, when I started in the energy business, you had energy efficiency, and that's where we spent a lot of our time. And there you had engineers putting together very simple ROI cases. Hey, does this make financial sense or not if I put in this new water heating system? Um, and it was a very, very simple calculus. But now that calculus needs to take into account sustainability figures, needs to take into account flex dispatch, and so many other things. So things have definitely gotten a lot more interesting, quite apart from the fact that we now have AI. And AI presents its own challenges. It uses a lot of energy, but it also presents us with the ability to reason so much more cleverly about all of these problems that face us.
So, when I think about it, we've always, at least in my lifetime in my career, we've always taken complex questions and tried to break them down into component parts, right? And we assign those component parts out and we become very specialized, and large organizations typically become very siloed, whether that's siloed within a business unit or whether it's siloed as a business unit. Um, how is what you guys are seeing today and what you just shared, how are you seeing that change and how is it different today?
I can jump in first if you want, Liam. Sorry. I think
Sure, go ahead.
the sustainability space and leading a sustainable business solutions function in an organization, I saw this firsthand. I think perhaps maybe more than a lot of organizations because I was constantly in the mode of trying to get us to do things differently. And as soon as you try to do something a little different, you run into all these challenges, right? If you could fix a problem within a function or division, it's probably already fixed because we find leaders who can do that. That's what they get rewarded for, and that's who we select. So business units run pretty good most of the time. Where the challenges exist is those overlaps. And sustainable business space is one of those activities that tends to find a lot of that. Because as Amory Lovins once said, to optimize part of the system is to pessimize the whole system. And he was right so often, at least in my experience. Let me throw a great example. It sounded simple. We thought that it would be a great idea to test and roll out electric delivery vehicles at Iron Mountain because they were well, it was de rigueur for a moment there to sign up to the EV 100 and commit to electrifying the fleet. But under the sex appeal of all that was some real driving business functions. EVs are cheaper to own and operate. Past the initial price point of early adopters, the actual operating costs are substantially lower than diesel vehicles. But beyond that, we saw that in tests, they were more fun to drive. They were quiet, no smoke. There was just a whole bunch of really good reasons why they offered a future for our fleet operations, and we were operating tens of thousands of vehicles around the world. However, there was some catches. So, for example, the fleet operations team thought that switching to electric, or okay, they're smart people, but at the same time, there was a little bit of self-interest there. Not buying diesel fuel was a really good deal, and so it kind of looked like free fuel to the fleet operations team. I mean, just plug it in. Meanwhile, over in the operations or the facilities management team, who had responsibility for the utilities line item, plugging in tens of megawatts of extra load actually made quite a bit of difference in the electric bill for a typical building. In fact, the fleet electrification could be bigger electric load than the rest of the building. And faced with things like Liam was talking about, such as time of day metering and multi-tier utility rates, you could do that wrong in such a way that you could really create significant cost exposure on the facilities side. Well, so naturally, the facilities folks were not so warm. Not only were they worried about digging up the parking lot and figuring out how to put wires in and charging stations in, they were looking at the expenses of that. And you had this interesting juxtaposition of overall the corporation was going to save a ton of money because it was a lot more efficient and a lot less expensive to charge vehicles correctly than to buy diesel. But the alignment of the individual functional leaders wasn't quite in the right place to make this an obvious win. Go on beyond that, and all of a sudden the energy management team gets involved and starts going, wait a minute, that changes the scale and scope of the potential for putting solar on that building or adding battery support to the building. So all of a sudden it becomes a multifunctional algorithm to come up with how do you make this a win for everybody in the business. And I think it's a great example, Eric, exactly what you're talking about. All these individual organizations were optimized to do their job really well, the way it had always been. But this new wrinkle of electrification really changed the landscape.
So it's really, thank you, Kevin. I think it's a great story as an illustration. It's the changing nature of the scale, the speed, the impact area of things that may on the surface sound relatively simple to do or to enact. And we're finding that this leakage, goes into other areas with other people who are incentivized differently within the organization, et cetera. So it requires a different way to think about things and different tools to help get there. Liam, with AI and other technologies arriving on top of all of this speed of change, what kinds of things are you seeing, and what are the ways that we can apply some of these tools to help us deal with the pace of change that we're seeing?
Well, when I got into the energy business like 20 years ago, a typical energy efficiency project in a commercial industrial client was, hey, let's replace the light bulbs. And it was that was a pretty simple deal to do. You didn't have to pull in that many stakeholders. The ROI pointed towards it being a good idea. Let's get on with it. Now we've got so many stakeholders that you've got to traverse both horizontally in the organization and vertically. And it does create a lot of complexity. Like now with flex services, you get paid for not doing things, for charging your batteries at a particular time, discharging them at another time, for using more energy at particular times, because in certain parts of the world at certain times of the year, energy prices are negative. You get paid to use energy. And it can take quite a while for folks to get their head around this. Now, something that I've been doing recently is using AI in another way to suck in a huge amount of context about the organization, everything from its corporate statements on sustainability through to its website, corporate website, through to field data that we're sucking out of meters in the field, settlement documentation, PPA, legal agreements, you name it, and sucking it in there, along with, guess what, the organizational structure of the organization, who reports to whom. And often I find that the more you put in context with an AI, and you put your problems to it and ask its advice, it can be surprisingly incisive at times. So this is one of the uses of AI that I found to actually put, say, our internal communications problems to the AI and say, look, here's the opportunity that we have on the table here with deploying this new technology. It's going to present this kind of problem, this kind of problem, and this kind of problem. We are moving from, just to go back to Kevin's example with EVs, we're moving from this being, this is a good problem for the P&L, but a bad problem for the balance sheet. How do we deal with this? How do we communicate with the various parties? And our results so far have been pretty remarkable on this, and it really kind of helps us avoid procrastination, and it allows us to focus on, hey, we've got a very, very interesting proposition here. Here's how we communicate it best. Here's a communications plan. Let's just go and get dug into this.
Excellent. I mean, I think that we all see it in our discussions with folks that we work with, these days as advisors, all three of us. The frustration's familiar. Projects that stall as teams uncover unanticipated dependencies. Initiatives that may complete on time, but ultimately underdeliver or aren't able to be tracked and monitored very well as to their effectiveness post-delivery because we didn't think that through ahead of time. So we think it's working. We think it's working is generally not a good enough answer these days. So, I think we're beginning to talk about and uncover these kind of system layers of dependencies that impact both cultural and organizational conceptual issues. And we're also seeing, a technology angle to this, right? What's the common denominator here, Liam? How do we understand where those interdependencies are, where they connect? How do we bring that into something where it can be quantified, right? And then analyzed and use these tools to help us think through and gain transparency.
I think the first thing to recognize is that there is increasingly little difference between energy efficiency, finance, sustainability, all of these various topics, and they're just different sides of the one coin. I think data is central to everything. A few years ago, people would said, "Oh, get everything into a data lake, get all of that metering data in there, and we're going to put a business intelligence system on top, and we'll somehow figure out what to do from there. We'll figure out the questions later." That was not that, in our experience, that really delivered very, very little. Really, you've got to know the questions that you want to ask of any particular information system in the energy space. Like, what do you care about? What are the KPIs that you want to measure against? What is most important? Is it lower energy costs, sustainability, whatever it may be? Get it out on the table. And I think we, as energy professionals, we need to look at pushing upwards as well. So the folks that sign off on the ESG statements at board level, we need to maybe ask them to reevaluate what the corporate goals are and just restate them if necessary, and then push downwards again. I think data is very, very important. Now more than ever, the data has got to be clean. You've got to be storing it over a long period. You have got to be aiming to get it onto a single pane of glass, so that at any time you or any other stakeholders can see the most important KPIs as to how your business is performing with respect to energy. You have got to be making the energy data available along with as much context as you can get. You've got to be making it available to AIs. What you can do with the frontier models now is absolutely incredible. And when you have all of the raw data is linked up with the contexts, in our view, you can do everything like from daily reports for all of the various stakeholders. You can do first drafts of ESG reports with respect to corporate goals. You can indeed ask the AI, hey, is there anything I should know about right now regarding our PPA performance? Or, hey, give me some ideas about what we should put into our register of opportunities for energy efficiency improvements.
So Liam,
you really have incredible tools to hand now.
yeah. So Liam, so incredible tools. It starts with data, right? I get all that. Isn't the real problem that most organizations face that the data isn't in one place, it isn't accessible, it isn't
That's
clean,
right.
right? How do we address that? I mean,
In,
that's
in
like
fact, Eric,
problem one for people. Go ahead, Kevin.
let me pile on, because I think it's not only that the historical data or the data we've always used to think about isn't in one place, like electricity consumption and power usage, but now we have new elements of data. For example, greenhouse gas emissions, which sounded pretty, I'll be frank, sounded pretty tree hugger-ish at one time. But when we actually apply the same rigor to these ESG or environmental social metrics as we expect from the rest of our business data, and evolve, granted, everybody started with spreadsheets and Excel, right? But accelerating the rigor, reliability, auditability of ESG data, just like the rest of our business data, quickly gets us to a place where we have confidence in it and reportability, but moreover, reveals a ton of new information that we can use in the business. So, for example, what we experienced at Iron Mountain was that greenhouse gas emissions was a proxy for dependence on fossil fuel. And what we really had never really thought about in the past was that dependence on fossil fuels in the business was hidden behind electricity bills, for example. And the cost volatility, availability, reliability of fossil fuel infrastructure turns out to have been a business constraint that we hadn't really fully brought into our decision-making picture. So being able to put these pieces together from all over the business and make them make the system think about all those pieces, make the people think about all those pieces, really helped us a great deal in identifying risks, but then flip it over, identifying opportunities. So an example, back to my EV thing, it was the policy shop in London, the government affairs folks, who raised a hand saying, hey, there is a new fee coming for circulating vehicles in London, a congestion charge. And in fact, that congestion charge, when we multiplied it across our fleet, would have been greater than fuel cost for our London fleet. So when we noticed, however, that EVs were exempt from that surcharge, we quickly did the math to figure out that, in fact, we made money by implementing EVs in London, and it turned out to be the place where we started our international conversion and switching the fleet in London first, because it immediately made money. So those were data points, all from very diverse pieces of the business, that had to come together in a way that was pretty unconventional to be able to capitalize on an opportunity, not just recognize the risks.
But and it's produced both, right? It produced better insight into business risk that had been fairly invisible before.
Would have
Right?
bit us pretty hard, right? The day that the day that you get the bill for this congestion charge is kind of late to start reacting to what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, back to this thought of I've got data all over the place. Traditionally, I may think I've got this project, I've got this thing to do, I've got this objective in mind. What data do I need to understand my options, right? And very often it was kind of a pretty narrow lane of stuff. I think, as you mentioned, it was, uh, energy load data, for example.
Mhm.
And that could be its own nightmare, trying to aggregate energy load data in a sensible way across an organization that has hundreds, if not thousands, of different, energy consumption points or facilities, right? We've all got that problem and seen that problem. But now we're adding the complexity that we also want to understand how that energy consumption affects other parts of the organization, other people's portfolio within the organization, whether that's managing assets at the facility level, whether it's in real estate and planning, looking for alternatives for behind the meter, uh, you know, behind the meter reliability plays for energy, whatever. So, Liam, how do we think about understanding what data we actually need in this more complex world today, and to B, how do we go find it, and then C, how do we bring it together in the right way with the right tool set to make it useful? Is that a huge company-wide system project and a return to what you described a minute ago as the old data lake concept, or is there a more efficient way to go about doing this?
Well, as a case in point, I'm thinking right now about a system I was working on just a few hours ago, and it basically has to do with scanning across whole continents looking for interesting renewable opportunities. And this is some of the stuff we do for companies that kind of market renewable solutions on a very large scale. But anyhow, we're pulling together what must be in the region of 24 data sources. Some of them are for private sources, some of them are from public sources. We're bringing these together in a database, munging them together using a lot of data science, some fairly traditional database stuff as well, and coming out with recommendations as to where there are opportunities and so on like that. And it's stunning us. It's mind-bogglingly powerful, if we say so ourselves, and it has incredible potential. And what is allowing us to do that is some of the newer AI technology is just incredibly clever. When you present it with what you're trying to do, and you guide it carefully, and ultimately you know what you're doing, it's incredibly good for finding some of these data sources, presenting them to you and say, well, hey, here's what we could do with this. What do you think about that? And you say, okay, let's give it a shot. No big deal if it screws up. It should only take us a few minutes to figure out whether there's anything in here or not. The AI system then goes off and sees what it can do with that. And then you review accordingly. Now, I'm probably making it sound very, very trivial. We've put a lot of work into this kind of system. But what I will say is that the democratization of the whole effort to pull together very diverse sources of information, the democratization effect is greater than ever before. What you can do now is pretty incredible. And you can try things out without it costing a tremendous amount of development costs, and you can see where it gets you. Now, I would have to emphasize, you do need to understand your domain, what you're trying to achieve. You also need to consider things like the quality of the data, the long-term reliability of it, and so on. But I feel very, very positive that things have moved on a long way since the days some years back of the data lakes, putting stuff up into a BI system and hoping for the best, that you can answer some interesting questions. If you know the questions you want to answer more than ever, I think there are solutions there.
So, yeah, and I guess that's what I kind of want to get to is, it's daunting for an organization to think about, a new strategy for aggregating, all of its potentially useful data components, right? Today, we all know they exist in different systems that are resident within the silos that we talked about before, right?
Yeah.
And when somebody over here needs access to data that's from over there, the first problem is, do I even know that that data exists over there? Right? But let's assume that I know I need it. So I'm going to go find it. Then I find out, yep, it's over there in this organization. Now am I looking at a 2 or 3 year system integration project to be able to bring it over to get what I need? Or is part of this technology evolution the ability to say, I have this tool needs this to feed it. If I can just get those components together in the right place, I can drop this tool on and I can get done what I need to do without it becoming a major project.
I think never underestimate how complex human beings can make issues of ownership. But, insofar as we all work in a single organization, and some part of the organization does have some piece of information that is very, very of very, very serious use to the sustainability department or energy procurement or whatever, and a case can be made to get at it, then I would say the technological barriers have come down considerably, I would say. But the will must be there. And, I'm a great believer in, articulating the what may be new goals and to the higher levels, to the C-suite, and this is not always easy. I get it, but I think sometimes that the C-suite may need to apply some guidance to all of the various underlying departments to kind of break down the silo. There's wonderful things that can be achieved here now more than ever, and it would be a shame if some kind of false sense of ownership got in the way of achieving those things.
Kevin, that sort of brings us back to the organizational side of things, right? The organizational, cultural, management led. What are your thoughts on all of this and how to bring the pieces together that are necessary to get to where you want to go, whether that's data or whatever else?
I think this is probably true for leaders in any functional area, but I think sustainability leaders end up with it on their plate first because they don't have a silo. There's not much of a sustainability team in most organizations, right? So figuring out the ability to work across the organization is a set of skills, a competency really, that I think is native to the sustainability team, and ideally is something that they're helping the rest of the organization learn for lots of opportunities. But I think it hits the sustainability folks first. Frequently we're placed in a corner. You either do the right thing or you do the sustainability thing, and you're stuck with the choices, right? The green solution is always more expensive, or you're just doing it for the looks. So I think that when we're faced with those kinds of trade-off opportunities, we're placed in a corner. And the secret sauce, I think, to most sustainability successes is figuring out how to get out of the corner by knocking down one of the walls. Right? The potential to change the dynamic. So finding a way to make all of those different leaders that need to come to the conclusion all winners. The first virtual power purchase agreement we did at Iron Mountain literally took 7 vice presidents to say yes. Now, you can't get 7 corporate vice presidents to say yes on anything. I mean, you can't agree on the sky color, but we were able to figure out how to get everybody in the room and see the opportunity that was before us, and it ended up being very successful financially, as well as a significant impact to our carbon footprint. In fact, the most flattering thing that happened in that whole process was when we finally, after 18 months, 2 years worth of work, put the paper in front of the CFO. He looked up at us and went, "Oh, this is great. Can we do more?" Yes, sir. Yes, we can.
Success breeds cooperation.
And pretty quickly, within another year, Iron Mountain became the first colo data center company, maybe still one of the only colo data center companies in the world that is 100% powered by clean energy. So, and flowed that through as a benefit to customers. What really triggered the whole thing was when it went from a cost management conversation to a grow the business conversation. So that's an example of that bigger picture perspective that has to get in the room in order to help everybody figure it out. And then I think there's just a bunch of actual competencies, listening skills. I know that sounds trivial, but actually hearing what each of those functions needs out of the, or what's the barrier in their world to make it successful. And then I think from the leader's perspective, the protagonist perspective, being able to have the empathy to see how everybody's working around the room. And back to Liam's earlier, really great point, have the data to prove it, right? You need the receipts. Folks aren't there for the emotional side of this. It's all great that I think sustainability programs and projects have maybe an advantage in these situations because they're sexy or they're interesting or they have some visibility, which is great. But that's just the sort of the excuse. That's the door opener. You got to come with the business prowess and the competencies across the organization to be able to make it true.
So it feels like we're identifying some of these organizational dependencies and dysfunctions and the misalignment maybe of incentives and the way that we've built within our entities being a hindrance to the kind of cross-functional coordination that we all said is now necessary based on the kind of interdependencies that we're seeing crop up around energy related issues, right? I mean, if I were to sort of summarize the first 20 minutes or whatever, that feels like half of where we are. The other half of where we are seems like the data and technology side. Yep, lots of cool tools that are going to do cool things and they're going to get cooler. But to feed those tools, we need access to, the underlying data for them to consume and ways to bring all of that together. But if I take a step back then and say, okay, here's these two parts of the elephant, if you will, right? What's the piece that brings it all together? Maybe that's the head and the tail. Where do I get the middle part, right? And maybe part of the key to the middle part is what you both touched on earlier as unintended consequences. Like I missed this dependency when I moved forward with this initiative. And then I discovered that, oh, this really screwed up this guy's life over here in this part of the organization. And I didn't even think about that. So is it bringing the skill set that you just referenced of the ability to kind of view things a little more holistically? Is there a way to quantify that through like some type of critical thinking that can be communicated and conveyed to people? Is that a skill that can be developed? And if so, how?
It's something we debate in our own organization a lot. And the word that keeps coming up is curiosity, like getting curious about things, So like, for instance, if you're intending to deploy some measure because of some new incentive in the energy marketplace, ask yourself, why do they have that incentive? What are they trying to achieve? Are other parts of our organization in other parts of the world, assuming you've got a multinational organization, are they going to encounter that incentive sooner or later because the same conditions exist there? And, knowledge, reading around a bit, we find is very, very useful because the same concepts keep coming up over and over again. And very, very often, we think that what gets a lot of data provisioning decisions over the line is that, okay, your core use case might not be strong enough to get this incredibly important pieces of information from another part of the organization. But hey, that piece of organization is needed for something similar because our European division requires this to actually operate. So for instance, in some parts of the world now, really detailed information on energy provenance, i.e. the source of the energy that goes into the manufacture of a product, that is necessary to sell that product, right? So once you have opened those floodgates in one part of the world in your organization, well, then it's very, very easy. By definition, they're probably open to other parts of the organization also, if you know what I mean. So sometimes you just have to try to engender a global view of things, and when you do, you might be able to bring other forces to bear on getting things done. But look, it all goes back to, if you're in the sustainability world, you just have to be that little bit cleverer than everybody else, because our lives are getting more complex and more interesting. And I think we just have to roll with that. We can't fight it.
Well, I think
I got a lot of
go ahead, Kevin.
I got a lot of attention. I got a lot of attention for our sustainability initiatives in a previous life when a financial analyst from an investment house sat in a meeting with some of our C-suite executives and finally said, "Well, we're just looking at sustainability competence as an intelligence test for leadership."
That's why we deserve the big bucks. Yeah.
There you go. Well, sustainability folks have to go somewhere, right? So that's great. And I guess it might make sense to go ahead and summarize a little bit and kind of have some thoughts here before we go into Q&A. I know that we've had some questions come in, some were submitted beforehand. When people registered, we had the invitation open for them to do that. So we can move to other people's questions here shortly. So if you were going to kind of summarize, Kevin, what are the key things you would want people to take away from this discussion?
So it's no surprise to most of us that optimizing a piece of the system maximizes the system. That's right. You would get to a point in an organization when you're leading a function when you figured that out a long time ago. I think what's an opportunity here is that sustainable business thinking or initiatives around environmental and social performance tend to be a permission or an excuse to help build the competencies of the organization to tackle these cross-divisional challenges, because we need to tackle cross-divisional challenges in order to solve them. So I think it's a great excuse to move in the direction of solving some big problems and delivering great results environmentally, socially, and economically for the business at the same time. The flip side of that is to play on folks' self-interest. The observation I would make is that folks who figure this out are upwardly mobile. These are sort of CEO level, look across the business type skills. And I think it's the kind of skills that you don't learn necessarily from being great at it as an operational or functional leader. It's a chance to really see the business across and develop a set of abilities that will be recognized later in careers to be able to be more successful across the board. I don't know. Does that sound too parochial?
No, not a bit. I think it sounds opportunistic, really, and I think it's applicable outside of the sustainability foundation as well, right? Leaders within business units, leaders within maybe traditionally defined areas of operational responsibility. It's the same skill sets that are going to open doors as they move forward, because 100%. None of us can, just like we can't wait for organizations to realign into something that's more fluid in order to deal with the kind of fluid challenges that we face today. By very definition, a fluid organization isn't going to be fluid enough if the world keeps being fluid around you, right? So we have to understand that looking beyond our traditional avenues of of success and defining wins in order to bring into play these other components that not only make my solution and initiative additive, but I also keep from screwing up something that
Mhm.
somebody else is doing that I didn't know about. Right?
Exactly. Making
Um,
enemies that you didn't even know were there. I look at it as maybe you guys think of this too, but I think of it as languages. Every function has its own language. Finance speaks finance, engineering speaks engineering.
Mhm.
Uh, and being able to be multilingual within the organization
Yeah.
and communicate on with the types of language and the types of incentives that other functions have is super valuable in being able to collect consortiums of the willing to get things done. And I think that the learning those languages is pretty important throughout one's career as you and it really boils down to some empathy and some listening skills, right? Hear how other departments talk, work on projects where you get exposure to other functions, learn their currency, and figure out how to understand where their incentives lie. I think all those factors play large parts of being successful in these cross-divisional, cross-silo activities.
Tim, what are your key
Absolutely.
takeaways?
I totally concur there with Kevin. We've just got to lean uh, into dealing with the complexity. The days are gone whereby we can come up with a simple little story and sort of say, hey, replace the light bulbs with the new LED light bulbs. We're going to save X amount of money. Aren't we clever? Um, there are no simple stories left. Everything is a lot more complex. And to get stuff over the line, we just have to lean in there with the data. And the data that appeals to different stakeholders might be different. But look, inherently, I think anybody in this business, in the sustainability business, knows that they're doing the right thing. We just have to work a bit harder for it now. But the converse of that, though, is that the outcomes are an awful lot greater. They're potentially far, far more valuable than they ever were. So I think we just need to get stuck in there, leverage whatever technology we can use to get our point across, um, and get out there and do it again tomorrow.
I think you have to. I think Liam, you're hitting on a key point, and I'll put it maybe even more bluntly. Sustainability projects don't win because they're greener. Sustainability projects win when it's better, faster, cheaper. It's just that by
Yes,
looking through the lens of environmental and social performance, we see the organization in a little different way. We see it a little more cross-cutting, and we find new opportunities to make our solutions better, faster, cheaper.
Well, I think it's not just sustainability solutions now. I think it's applicable across a much broader spectrum than it was
Fair enough.
maybe a couple, 3 years ago, right? And that's a combination of, not only the development and evolution of the kinds of skill sets that we're talking about here being applied in different ways now, but it's also the needs of, maybe those uh, legacy systems aren't
Mhm.
systems being the concept of systems, uh, not just technology, aren't delivering the answers that we need today. And I think, when I think about key takeaways from this session and what I, hope people would take with them is that, this needs to happen at the tip of the spear, right? This isn't a wait for Moses to come down from on high or wait for the the CEO to say we're going to start doing it this way and everybody fall into line. The world moves too fast now for that, right? The opportunities are too significant. The risks are too material to take a wait and see approach. So how do we make the right things happen and where does that need to come from? I think it needs to come from the people that are doing. And it's not about launching massive system projects. No doubt we need those, right? And they'll be wonderful when they happen. But that's not the answer for today. The answer for today is how do I scrounge around and grind and get what I need and develop the cooperative environment that I need to be able to pull stuff that feeds into this, the definition of this particular initiative success.
Eric, I
Go
think
ahead.
you're so right. The right now, just to bring this to the top, back to the top of the page, it is this incredible disruption in the electricity markets that gives energy managers all of a sudden a front row seat to exactly this conversation. Because what has been the same forever, pay the utility bill and change the light bulbs, right, Liam?
Mm-hmm.
That is completely changed today. I mean, you can literally be told by the utility company that you can't expand your business because they can't deliver you enough power to meet your needs anytime reasonable soon. That is shocking, right? I mean, when was the last time the utility company told you no? Come on. Right? That's happening. That's not just happening to gigawatt data center facilities. That's starting to happen to retailers and folks who are building a new distribution center. Are finding, or I've had a recent situation where folks wanted to put a fast charging EV station in the parking lot, and that was enough power to actually stop the show. So, and that's the wrong day to find out that you haven't thought through the energy disruption, right? So whether it's your new utility billings, the carbon conversation, or just availability and reliability, the disruption in the electricity industry has really given electricity managers, operations folks permission to start leading this conversation about looking for ways to work across the business and find different solutions.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's pick up a couple of questions that have come from participants. And I'm gonna start by flipping us back into tech world. So this is primarily for Liam, although Kevin, I think your take on it would be interesting afterwards as well. AI is such a common term these days. It's almost in danger of becoming meaningless. What is it really? How do we use it right? And what pitfalls should we be aware of when thinking about AI applications?
Oh, there's
You
so
have
much
10
there.
seconds.
Oh, yeah, thanks. First of all, it is your servant, and the way to treat it is you need to kick yourself up to the C-suite. You've just been promoted, and you now have a very eager recent college graduate join you who's very, very intelligent, but constantly needs to be kept on a tight leash. And if you view it in that way, then the simplest of the AI products out there can begin giving you value. But something I have found is, like, if you go back to the old Reagan saying, trust but verify. You've got to place a certain amount of trust in the AI. Tell it about the context. Tell it about what your desires for the project are, or whatever. Tell it about what your fears are, but verify everything that comes out of it. Not trust it, particularly if you have got a column of numbers and you want them totaled up. Use a spreadsheet. Do not use an AI. If you want to reason about possibilities and opportunities and linkages between different concepts, go AI. It's incredible, but you have to put the effort into it. Trust but verify.
Kevin, you want to?
If I was piling on, I would say, yeah, we absolutely are at the overuse stage of the bubble, right? Of the hype phase of the technical approach. I think that for me, it's been helpful to find a couple of applications where I personally can use an AI tool, like whether it's a ChatGPT or something equivalent or similar, and just in your own usage. It helps start to develop an appreciation for what it can do and an appreciation for what it can't do. I have personally experienced ChatGPT giving me the wrong answer or a wrong or a wrong-ish answer. and call him on it, right?
Yeah.
And say, I don't think that's right. And then you get the next answer of, oh, you're right. A little more research has indicated that, right? So I think that those types of personal opportunities help develop some appreciation for what these tools can help you do. The flip side of that is, don't assume that your personal use case is representative of what the whole business could do if it thought about using these tools in different ways across the organization. The organizational application of AI isn't just a huge ChatGPT question.
Yeah.
You have to think a little bit differently about it from the organizational perspective, but that's where your team and folks with more experience outside of what's going on can help you. Don't be afraid to get some support from outside resources to be able to really look through how these tools can be more effective for you. But it starts just with a little bit of personal homework, personal experience to develop some understanding of the capabilities and maybe the limitations of what the tools can do today.
I think the limitations piece is interesting and important, right? Because at the end of the day, it does what we ask it to do. And oftentimes it does a bit more than we ask it to do. But if we don't ask it the right things, then we're not going to get, not only we're going to get not the right answers, but we're not going to get the answers that we should have, which may be two different things as well. It sort of, opens this path to the unintended consequences, that we talked about before. If we're not bringing that to the table in the utilization of the tool, we can't really expect the tool to uncover it for us. Or if it does, then we have to be smart enough to see it. Gets back to sort of the collective thinking. I really like the reference a couple of times in this to listening. Listening to understand the world that the person whose cooperation you're trying to get or collaboration you're trying to get, what does their world really look like? And be open to that fact that it may be different than what you thought it was or what you think it should be, right? And I think we kind of have to approach these tools in the same way. I know what I want to learn, but I have to be open along the way to figuring out, what is it that I should be learning beyond what I know I want to learn from it. That kind of brings to another question from the group. Kevin, what are the keys to bringing together cross-functional teams in organizations that aren't used to working together necessarily? I know we've touched on this a lot, so maybe collectively we use this as a way to kind of tie up or summarize that piece of the discussion today.
I think the skill set associated with being able to engage other functional leaders or folks from other functions starts very personal, right? It's become find some empathy and some listening skills in how others are doing it. I think you just nailed it, Eric, that don't superimpose our beliefs the way we believe it should be or the way we think it is. Try to actually figure out what other departments and other functional leaders are really, really driving for. I think the atmosphere of trust in an organization is a pretty crucial competency of the organization, which is an interesting place, right? We're not necessarily taught that, and it's not the first reflex when working with other business leaders across the organization. And the higher we go in the organization, the less that perhaps is true. So, but the idea of walking into a meeting assuming the other person has the best interest of the organization at heart until proven otherwise, I think helps build some trust. Put yourself out there first. Maybe show your cards, even to the point where maybe you're vulnerable. I think helps other leaders appreciate that you're operating in that sense, And those are some just personal level tools that it takes to, I think, advance a cross-divisional success story. I mentioned earlier, I think that sustainability and environmental social governance issues tend to lend themselves to opening some of those doors a little better for a lot of people, because the person that you're talking to, maybe despite their first skepticism, probably recognizes that you're trying to do the right thing, and that's permission to maybe take a few more steps in this collaboration, in this trust space that other folks don't get. So I think that's a big advantage from a sustainable business leaders or from a functional manager who's trying to work on a sustainability issue, helpful. The key then is to not let it go too far, right? Don't let folks think you're on a mission from God. You are in a business, you're in a business context, and you need to put that into the game. And I think that earns a lot of respect when folks, and I apologize for being a little melodramatic here, but when folks get to use their head and their heart on a business project, it really opens doors. And I've had a lot of examples of folks where I was the protagonist first, and then later saw them use the same skills in other functional cross-divisional things that they were interested in. And that was pretty gratifying, that we were seeing the organizational competency to work across silos start to take hold. I don't know, Eric, was that too much, too squishy, too touchy-feely for you? I hope not.
I don't know. I think if it can be driven down into the right structure and the right logic, then we can go make it happen. That's my. Liam, did you have a thought or two on that real quick? And then we'll wrap up.
I think insofar as that you're a humble source of information, particularly regarding energy, that can get you a lot of friends. Once upon a time, if you were in production, you couldn't care less what the energy procurement guy had to say, really. Energy was untapped. There was as much of it as you need to produce what you had to produce. That's not the case anymore. Energy is not simply on tap anymore, particularly in certain parts of the world. It depends on the time of the day, how much is on tap. So very, very often, a lot of folks like those in production facilities and so on, they find it difficult to get their head around some of these counterintuitive concepts. And, being there and start to saying, look, this is how this works. This is why they're doing this. Let me know how I can help, because there could be big efficiencies that you in facilities or in production might be able to bring to bear. And I'll help you get your head around that. So, yeah, I think a lot of folks are intimidated by this new world. And I think you can pick up some brownie points there with your colleagues.
You had a great example earlier, Liam, of pricing going negative in some places at some times. Can you imagine going to your business colleague and saying, if you run this machine at midnight, they pay you to run it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's a head is exploding. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I only wanted to just, add a couple of sort of structural tactical thoughts, right? I think that we've talked about a lot of different things today. There is a way to organize all of this. We committed that following this session, we would do kind of a summary of key points discussed and some of those things. I think, we can include that in putting some structure into this conversation, which has maybe meandered a bit. But I think it revolves around applying critical thinking to defining objectives, right? And defining the problem that you want to solve. And we know that it involves organizational dependencies. It involves data and tools and access to both. And where do those come from? And it's a whole set of challenges in and of itself. And then the concept of this of interdependency, and where are the unintended consequence pitfalls. And I think the approach that we're all sort of driving to is train ourselves to think about all the aspects of those three areas first, right? That'll allow us to better plan which will ultimately allow us to better execute, which ultimately eliminates the frustration that we're seeing today with stalled or bogged down projects, with projects that aren't achieving what we thought they were going to achieve and not understanding why, or having projects that are in the rearview mirror, but we have no idea how they're doing because nobody thought to set up a way to measure and track them, right? That's what those are the organizational initiative-based efficiencies that we need to get rid of and drive out of our organizations through better execution and planning. I think one of the things that all of us agree on and do with clients that's really helpful is understanding what's on the mental whiteboard, right? And how do we get it from there to something that's being enacted and being acted upon? And it's leveraging these kinds of tools that we've talked about around everything that's swirling around and being able to put it in some kind of context, which we can often have not because we're smarter than the next guy, but because we have the perspective of not being in the trees. And I think there's a huge advantage to that at various points in time. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to sit through this with us today. If you like this, let us know. We'll do it again. If you didn't like this, let us know that, and we'll never do this again. But I know that I had fun, but I always have fun talking to these gentlemen, and we appreciate you giving us your time today, Liam and Kevin, and everybody else. Thank you very much. Have a great day.